All right, welcome back to Unit 7 Video 2. This is going to be on the mass media, in particular our mass media, as the social institution is shaped by capitalism. Now, when we talked about capitalism before, when we talked about economies in a general way, we talked about the fact that you have to answer three particular questions in order to analyze an economy. In this case, capitalism is going to answer these questions for the mass media. What is produced, how it is produced, and who gets to consume it. In the case of capitalism, what is produced is whatever will make money. How it is produced is whatever way will maximize that profit. And third, who will consume it is whoever can afford it. Now, we saw when it came to food in the economy that this had some sort of perverse outcomes. When you turn an economy into something that exists for profit, you end up with all kinds of processing of food that doesn't necessarily make it healthier, but it's processed in ways in order to make a profit. So the social institution gets warped in a way. That's nothing against capitalism, and it's certainly nothing against capitalistic corporations. If we don't like that, as Milton Friedman said in the video, in the film, The Corporation, it's not their job to fix that. It's their job to make a profit. It's our government's job to regulate how that happens if we don't like those outcomes. But we saw those outcomes are not necessarily good when it comes to food. Same thing's going to be the case here with regard to the mass media, except the problem is, I don't want to say worse, but it's arguably different because remember, the whole point of the mass media is to communicate our culture. So what happens when what gets produced is not what's going to be beneficial to these people necessarily who step in and who get an understanding of the world and what they're supposed to do. It's not organized around making them into good people. It's organized around making corporations money. What's going to happen? The issue is, at least potentially, it's going to be problematic. So when we organize mass media organizations, mass media corporations, according to capitalism, they don't just transmit mechanically, this is what the culture is, and so we are going to communicate it to each member of the population. They don't just take what is out there in terms of our symbolic universe and our collective consciousness and just transmit it. That's not necessarily going to make them a profit. Instead, what they're going to do is overemphasize certain types of stories or certain elements of stories that they think will make them a profit. So you go from saying, from transmitting just everything here to saying, well, these particular symbols seem to be popular. They seem to get more and more of these people to come and get culture from our corporation, so let's keep showing them that stuff. For example, you think about the movies and the TV that you watch. How many old women, like 80, 90-year-old women do you see? How many 70-year-old women? How many 60-year-old women do you see? As compared to women in their 20s and early 30s. What you are given are not just every possible symbol. They are selecting a very specific subset of that symbolic universe, especially when it comes to gender. And not just any 20 or 30-year-old woman. Generally speaking, they are relatively narrowly defined in terms of what appearance will allow them to be communicated by the mass media to us. And that's just with regard to one particular type of symbol, females. When we talk about the stories that we are told, how many stories where there's a conflict is it resolved without violence as compared to with violence? I'm not going to pretend that I don't love the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Almost all of the movies that I watch absolutely have people being shot and killed. I mean, it's kind of incredible. The mass media that I partake in, the corporations that I purchase my mass media from, are transmitting to me not every possible belief that could exist about how you might resolve conflicts. They're hammering violence over and over and over at me. No, these are just two examples when we talk about women and we talk about violence here. These are just two examples, but what it suggests is these mass media corporations are not taking everything here and just saying, this is what you need to know. This is our culture. They're picking the parts that they think we are going to pay for and come back for. Sex and violence in particular. All right, I got to scroll down on that. I wish I had a big, strong follow-up to the sex and violence thing. I actually do, but it's a conceptual big follow-up. All right, so what I just talked about is picking some symbols out of here and some beliefs out of here and overemphasizing them. Now, here is the deep, deep step that we're about to take. In overemphasizing some of those things, the things that will, importantly, not the things that are going to make us better people necessarily, the things that are going to generate money for those corporations. In overemphasizing certain ones, they start to change our culture. What used to be one symbol or one way of defining something among multiple becomes the dominant way. What used to be one belief among many becomes the dominant belief. So, for example, showing young sexualized women over and over and over again at a certain point isn't just saying, here's another symbol of a beautiful woman, here's another symbol of a sexualized woman, here's another one, here's another one. At a certain point, that meaning of a particularly narrowly defined beauty and a particular degree of sexualization gets attached to the symbol of woman. That meaning gets assigned to it just by virtue of that overemphasis. Same thing's true with violence. And it's not that, like, I've watched all these Marvel movies, I'm not going out and shooting people, but what is getting communicated to me over and over again is the prominence of the belief that conflict is a zero-sum game. Compromise isn't the way to get through these things. It is you have to defeat the other side. So what we have is we've gone from a mass media that in a general way communicates this culture to a mass media that is shaping, creating the culture that we live in. Now, if you think about that, stop and think about that for a moment. In other words, what is creating our culture is for-profit corporations that, again, there's nothing wrong with for-profit corporations, but did we ever at a certain point say, we want you to be the ones who are telling us this is how reality is, or this is how you should proceed through your life? I didn't. Probably you didn't either, and probably neither you nor I before this lecture really thought of it that way. Because when you're watching it, it's entertainment, it's fun. But remember, this is also 40 plus hours on average for an American citizen to be receiving this sort of interaction, this mass media interaction. This is going to affect, if we keep seeing over and over and over again, this is how conflict is resolved. We keep seeing over and over and over again, this is how women are supposed to be. This is how men are supposed to be. That is something that is involved in that socialization process. Okay, so in other words, capitalistic media corporations are not just communicating culture, which is the point of the mass media. It's what the mass media is supposed to do. They are shaping our culture, creating our culture. This machine that we step into has in part been created by for-profit corporations that are not creating it in order to make me or my kids happy or fulfilled. They're creating it in order to make me and my kids want to come back and watch more. All right, but what about those functions of the mass media? Sorry, I got to pull my script down a little bit. This function of the mass media. The mass media still exists in order to create social cohesion and in order to socialize kids. It's just now it's being done mostly by for-profit corporations. So they're still socializing my kids. It's just, what are they socializing my kids into? They're socializing my kids. My son, my 13-year-old son, is being taught girls and women are supposed to look a certain way, and you are supposed to interact with them in a certain way. Now, obviously, my kids have got my wife and myself and other people to also give them messages, but am I telling my kids 40 hours plus a week of stories about how to treat girls and women? No, I'm not. But the mass media is, and they're telling these recurring, what are called archetypal stories, patterned stories, where for the most part, men act in these patterned ways and women act in these patterned ways. All right, so that socialization function is still taking place. It's just taken place. It's being done by corporations that don't necessarily have a kid's best interest in mind. What they're trying to do is make money. Mass media corporations that exist within the social institution of the mass media are still creating social cohesion, but as you'll see in the readings from Amusing Ourselves to Death, some of the beliefs about how the world works that we get from the mass media are amazingly detrimental to our participation in a democracy. We tend to, just mild spoilers, we are exposed to story after story after story where the solution presents itself within an hour, or in a sitcom within 30 minutes, or in a commercial within 30 seconds. There's some problem, and all you have to do is look the right way, and you can resolve that problem. What that communicates to us is that the world is generally a fairly simple place with simple solutions that just require the right way of looking at it in order to find it. That's a problem, because the world is not simple. It's full of complicated, multifaceted problems, but we're being socialized to believe that problems generally have solutions that are relatively simple. They just have to be found by a clever individual. All right. God, it's depressing. You'll read it and you'll love it, but you'll also hate it. In conclusion, these corporations aren't doing anything wrong. Really importantly, capitalism is not bad. It's just, it's not their job to look out for you or me or my kids. It's their job, their manifest function, their intended consequence is to make a profit. Tell stories that will make a profit. If those stories involve sexualizing women, they're going to tell those stories. If those stories involve violence as the conflict resolution mechanism, they're going to tell those stories. If their stories involve men who are incapable of expressing emotions other than anger, they're going to tell those stories. As long as those stories make a profit, we can't expect anything else. But their latent functions, the unintended consequences of shaping the symbolic universe and the collective consciousness that are going to influence us, remember, to have patterns of thoughts at the end of all this. Those latent functions, those are still being fulfilled. It's just the patterns of thoughts that you and I have are being shaped by these for-profit corporations, at least according to the mass media, the way we do it. And when you get down to the idea of having patterns of thoughts, patterns of behavior, what we're talking about there is my personality. What is a personality other than the habitual way that I conduct myself, and that I conduct myself that'll be, prefaced in some ways, premised in some ways on my way of thinking. These corporations that are creating these patterns of thought are influencing our personalities in ways that none of us ever never gave them consent to do. All right, so at the end of the day, we have to decide if we're happy with this, then it's great. If we're not happy with it, we absolutely cannot blame these corporations. It's their job to play the game, to make a profit within the rules that are set by our government. If you don't like it, that's the place that you need to go. All right, that's it for my videos for this time. What we are going to do, I need to finish watching this documentary that I'm thinking I'm going to assign to you guys. It has a fascinating slightly different perspective than the amusing ourselves to death. So I'm pretty sure I'm going to at least assign part of it. If you have any questions, feel free to email me or post about it in discussion. That's it. I will see you guys next time.